Okay, we have made it to the last presentation. As everybody knows, it is the last presentation. It makes the entire event, so no pressure on our last panelist. As I mentioned earlier today, interest and adoption knowledge graph is growing rapidly. Now, final segment, Harsh Sharma, who Mike, I think you introduced earlier, he's our senior advisor and co-chair of the EDM Council's Open Knowledge Graph Shared Lab Initiative. He's going to give us an overview of that initiative, and then he's going to hand it over to Svetlana Sikula, the vice president from Gartner Group, who's going to moderate the final panel of the day to discuss the advantages and benefits of deploying knowledge graph for a specific business case, in this case, AML and KYC. So Harsh, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, John, and hello, everyone. In the interest of time, I'll keep it very brief because we have an excellent panel discussion coming up. So the mission of the lab is really to promote the adoption of what we call mutualized value, knowledge graph-enabled business use cases, and we are industry agnostic. For example, at the beginning of this year, we successfully delivered a comprehensive fraud ontology and graph training to a large government agency. We also launched the Financial Services Working Group, and our first use case has been around how do we apply knowledge graphs to improve KYC, customer intelligence, and help catch bad actors more efficiently. So a little bit about that on the next slide, please. Could you kindly build the first one, first click? So as you can tell here about the business challenge, the global financial crime poses a systemic risk. The cost of compliance for the banks is ginormous, and our anti-money laundering processes continue to be largely manual and expensive. And I need not go into the numbers, they tell the story by themselves. Next click, please. So what's the opportunity here? We believe that by infusing the knowledge graph, machine learning, AI, ML, we can demonstrate that we can improve customer intelligence, we can improve the accuracy of financial crime investigations, and overall mitigate the risk of dealing with bad actors. Who is participating? Next click, please. As you can tell, we have a growing global participants community led by AML subject matter experts. They are driving the scope of this 90-day prototype we are developing. And we have also started reaching out to regulatory and government agencies. Next click, please. Thank you. So what's our game plan? What are we delivering? So in 90 days, we've been developing an entity intelligence knowledge graph, leveraging open public data sets. And I should give a big shout out to open corporates for sharing their corporate registry signals data with us for the development of this prototype. Banks will take this prototype and try it out with their internal data sets. We are also in the process of developing what we call before and after econometrics, like how does it help lower the costs, et cetera. And we are also enriching the FIBO ontology with the key concepts from customer intelligence. So with that background, let me turn it over to Svetlana, but also introduce very briefly, as I said, Svetlana will be moderating this session, and we have Karim Rajwani, SVP CEO from Scotiabank. We have David Newman, SVP from Wells Fargo. We have Jeffrey Stein, CEO, Deep Discovery. He's an AI investigative journalist. And we also have Diana Greenberg, who is head of AML innovation and econometrics at MUFG. So with that, Svetlana, please take it away, and let's have a exciting conversation.
Thank you, Harsh. Let me read, we just published a new prediction. It was published last night. It's by 2023, organizations with shared ontology, semantics, governance, and stewardship processes to enable inter-enterprise data sharing will outperform those that they don't. So that's a very new predict. And as you heard earlier in this today's event, graph is one of the top trends for Gartner this year. We recently published a new inaugural cool vendor report for graph technologies. And knowledge graphs are at the peak of our hype cycle. So let me start with David, as he is really passionate about knowledge graphs. David, can you explain to us what's the difference between the knowledge graph and just graph databases? So what makes it stand out?
Great, yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone. So,
Sure, we hear you.
graphs are tremendous. The difference is that very useful and formal data representation or information is composed.
Hey, David, sorry, David, could you get closer to your mic? We can't hear you.
Is this better?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll rewind the tape. So a graph is a way of rendering information that's actually reflecting a network. So taking our AML use case, may have a network or a graph of payers and payees, so that we could see a set of payers paying payees who may pay other recipients, other payees. And each of these transactions may be small dollar amounts, and until they're aggregated above the AML threshold, by looking at the interactions of all of these parties by traversing the graph, we may not know right away AML. It may come under the radar. The graph gives us the ability to traverse information, and it's an important capability. Knowledge graph is a value-added capability that in itself represents a network of concepts that reflect the meaning of data, and it adds tremendous value. So the knowledge graph will provide typically full, portable, standardizable concept graph over the basic codes underlying graph and more meaning and more context. FIBO is an example of a knowledge graph that might provide full information so no one has to reinvent, where we might see that each node in the graph, payee, payers, are roles that have identity, or legal entities, commercial entities, that all have identifiers, etc. FIBO provides that additional, or any other broad-based ontology will provide that additional layer of knowledge where we can query certain abstractions and better insight by data. Any more of the panel's time, but this is a significant leap forward for data management in enterprise for interoperability and greater precision. Back to you, Svetlana.
So let me ask the panel, starting with Karim maybe, what's the business value of graph approach? How does it help manage risk, and how does it help manage risk and balance risk with value?
Great, thank you so much. From a AML and financial crime perspective, I mean, this certainly gives us the tools and the capabilities to do a number of things. First and foremost, it helps us to find major financial crime threats. Traditional, monitoring systems are very transaction and client-centric. They're big, they're expensive, and not just expensive from a technology perspective, but expensive in terms of operational perspectives, right? And we fail to find major financial crime threats, and I'll just go into some examples of that. True, it is a strategic data asset that can be used right across the organization and financial crime. So, whether that be a fraud or KYC, if you want a 360 view of a client, you really need knowledge graph capabilities, taking in external data or internal data and creating that complete 360 view of a client, because that's what an investigator does. So rather than an investigator doing that, technology can do that for us. If you look at sort of the real life examples of major financial crime issues that have hit the papers in the past few years, there was a Troika laundromat, the Azerbaijan laundromat, and the Russian laundromat, which is really interesting. So that was 5,140 companies that were set up. 732 banks got involved in that, including 19 Russian banks. And it was over 96 countries. And so one traditional methods, cannot pick up something like that. Two, even one bank, it becomes challenging for one bank to pick something like that up, and that that speaks to the need for sort of potentially consortiums. But there were common themes, and Transparency International published a number of reports in terms of the common themes. And one of the most common themes was the use of shell companies. Companies set up in offshore jurisdictions with nominee directors, the involvement of PEPs. So, I have used it, and it can be used to identify major financial crime threats. You can use it as a tool in your KYC processes. Organizations have used it as part of their sales practices to enhance sales. And most recently, we've used these techniques on identifying human trafficking with a lot of success. So I'll leave it there and open it up later for questions.
Any more views on the value of graph technologies or graph approach? So
yeah, this is Diana. Yep. So I think, it's very interesting that, when I agree with everything that Karima said, but I think when one goes to pitch the idea of knowledge graphs to senior management, senior leadership, what's going to be clearly asked is, what is the return on investment of such a pitch? Because obviously there are costs involved with setting up, a graph technology. The data has to be reasonably, clean. There's internal and external data. And what I'd like to do is make very concrete to senior management who really doesn't know what graph analytics is or what a knowledge graph is. They don't know what an ontology is. The benefit is that it provides a very robust, consistent way for triage and KYC colleagues to be able to use the data and to be able to traverse the data in all directions. And think of all the time that would have been spent if we actually had a knowledge graph that's clearly defined, where as you're doing due diligence, for example, you have all of the data available on a graph where you know what it means, the customer you're focusing on, all of the connections that that customer may have, whether UBOs or related parties, all of that information is right in front of you. It's a great time saver, which is exactly what management wants to hear. They don't want to delete number of people, but they want to make them more effective. Similarly, in AML, the question is, all these investigations really take up time, and the display of the information is very, very effective, and that's really what gets it sold. Now, on the negative side, of course, you might have, the data has to be available. There's data privacy issues sometimes that have to be worked through. There's the quality of the data, and I think one thing that also is key is there's sometimes fear from investigators that regulators might say, well, how come you didn't look at this particular data that's displayed, this point? And so I think that has to be, that has to be looked at carefully, and that message has to be, relayed back to regulators as to how we address that.
So now when we have a little bit of a perspective, I wanted to ask Jeffrey, to wear his investigative journalist hat and let us know about using the public data, using the lab about which we just heard. Can you talk about this?
Yeah, so I'm a veteran tech entrepreneur who for a couple of years became a journalist using AI technologies to enable investigative journalism around the world, and particularly around organized and financial crime. And one great example is we uncovered a previously unreported nuclear trafficking ring. And the only way it could have been discovered was through a graph-based approach of no individual fact was by itself a slam dunk or the smoking gun, but the facts taken in totality across the network was very unusual. This centered around a Swiss bank, a relatively small Swiss bank that was buying operating companies that were engaged in trafficking key parts for Iran's nuclear program. And so the graph is really critical to network analysis. That's why you need it, is the best technology for network analysis. In the real world, crime these days, organized crime, and as Karim mentioned, large scale, very material financial crime is done through networks, not just in individuals. And so one needs to take a network-based view of risk for one's clientele to really better lower your risk profile, for something like being unwittingly caught up in something like the Russian laundromat. So we're currently working with the EDM Council in this Open Graph Lab, which I'm really excited about, to develop a prototype product, basically a platform for applying the knowledge graph for evaluating network risk of clientele across the bank, giving those 360-degree views. That's really the key to it. It's also, it's really bringing into account kind of the way that journalists look at things. And of course, there's the enhanced due diligence process within banks. There's limited manpower to do that for all clientele. But the technologies have come a long ways, particularly around the scalability of graph databases, the experience with knowledge graphs, and also natural language processing for being able to take into account unstructured data. So being able to do information extraction out of unstructured data. So a lot of very valuable facts that are hidden in news articles, legal case filings, complaints, various structured data sources well beyond the corporate registry data to make connections as to true relationships. And so that's what this project, this 90-day sprint with EDM Council is really all about.
That's fantastic. I encourage everyone to type the questions in. We have a little bit of time, but meanwhile, I also wanted to ask our panelists, what are the barriers? Are they perceived or real? What are the barriers? Diane, you tried to start saying something.
Yeah, I think, so as I said, I think that, there's millions of data points out there and, whether internal or external, and there's a lot of data that would be connected through knowledge graphs and through graph analytics in general. And what will happen is if you're an analyst and you're looking at all of this information, then you need guidance to be able to filter in and out in terms of the information that you're looking at. There's, you have to know what is the data that you're looking at. That's why the ontology is very, very important because, you have different levels of knowledge base with your analysts. You have level ones, which do basic triage, and then you have investigators who are much more sophisticated. But the graph is displayable to all, and and makes its way through the triage function. So as I said, I think one thing is we have to be very careful and make sure that the interaction we have with regulators, if we show them these knowledge graphs, that they don't go overboard and expect every single data item to be looked at. We need to make sure that what is displayed is filterable in a reasonable way, so that the more salient points come up, And we have to make sure that, behind the scenes, things like data privacy, the cost of setting up, the infrastructure, that all of that is minimized.
So we have a minute, literally a minute for a quick answer. We have one question from Prakash. What is a typical timeline for concept to working usable, not POC release for an initial use case? David, maybe you can give the answer.
So it's very important that we develop a knowledge graph based on a specialized line of business use case. And we don't think that we're going to be boiling the ocean. So we want to get started with a very narrow, crisp use case and model that data from the bottom up, and then add in the additional abstractions as we add in other use cases. Knowledge graph is an organic building block process. So the more that we've developed, the faster the ultimate end result of knowledge graph materialization is going to occur. So in the early days, it's going to take longer, obviously, than when we've built a critical mass of conceptualizations of the business space. And as we build more, it will go faster and faster. Our investment will decrease. Our return will get greater.
So, can you give maybe in one sentence the answer what to expect approximately as a rule of thumb? What the time?
So I could, as a rule of thumb, you should look to see you could do something very quickly, as we're demonstrating in the AML use case right now. That's done in about 3 months. So you can get in 3 months without a problem. And production-ready applications are going to really, obviously, take a longer time.
Very impressive. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I was going to say that before John pings me and rings my bell. This was an awesome and insightful conversation. So thank you for moderating this session. And panel members, really enjoyed your insights. And of course, on top of everything, your contribution to the lab guidance. Kareem, David, Jeffrey, Diana, thank you. And of course, a big shout out to all the working group members for putting in their time and energy and passion. John, thank you for leaving my contact information. I think I'm happy to connect any further questions offline and connect with the person who posted how long it takes and all that, and share some additional insights as needed. With that, John, over to you.
Harsh, thanks. And Harsh, I know you've got a team already, but we are always looking for more contributors. So we've got
Absolutely.
some banks involved and major platform providers. Please join this effort. It's really going to be cutting edge stuff. So please reach out to myself or Mike or Harsh and get involved in this activity. Okay, with that, this wraps the America's DataVision event. Let me first thank our sponsors, Atacama, Cambridge Semantics, Informatica, and Timber AI. A big shout out to all of our speakers and our panelists. And again, a final thank you to all of you who took the time out of your day to attend this event. It goes without saying, everybody, one heck of a year, but be safe, enjoy your families, get some time off. Happy holidays to everybody. 2021 is going to be an exciting year. We're looking forward to seeing many of you and maybe back in person again. So on behalf of the EDM Council and all of our speakers today, thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the day and happy holidays.
Happy holidays, everyone. Thank you.